Now joining us to discuss delivering advanced defense systems, Bryan Rosselli, President of Advanced Products and Solutions at Raytheon Technologies, in conversation with Brandi Vincent, Pentagon correspondent for AIScoop.
Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to SCSP and the Exchange team for the invite and hosting this really stellar event. Today we're going to talk about how the integration of advanced technologies is really reshaping the national security landscape, and against that backdrop, how the U.S. and allies can maintain a competitive edge. I'm joined by Bryan Rosselli, who is an experienced engineer, strategist, and program leader. He's with Raytheon. Bryan, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, thank you.
To kick us off, why don't you tell us just a little bit about you, what you and your team are working on, and where you guys fit in this particular discussion?
Awesome, well we have a really fun portfolio within Raytheon. We do a lot of sensing systems that go on other people's platforms, and we kind of view ourselves as a mission equipment provider, just always in search of new capabilities to be able to bring to the fight. And it's interesting, how did I get into AI? It actually started about 30 years ago, well before AI, or at least you'd read about it. But almost my first day of work, I sat down with an old curmudgeon, graybeard guy, and he said, you know, one of the toughest things about our job is our sensors only use about 10% of the data that they generate. Turn that into information. And I've spent the last 30 years trying to prove him wrong. And but Raytheon in and of itself, and AI actually just I think is a really cool opportunity to be able to maximize more of the data, turning into information and actionable things for our customers, our warfighters. And Raytheon, of course, is not an AI company. I view ourselves as a practitioner or a user on how do we partner up with AI companies to be able to bring better capabilities to the warfighter.
Can you expand a little bit on some of the recent examples of AI prototypes or different capabilities that your team is enabling, specifically how they matter to defense?
Sure, I mean, I guess I'll go back to the data thread. But one of the products we make is a electro-optical turret that searches, goes on a helicopter, it searches looking for threats, and at the end of the day, it collects light. That light turns into pixels, pixels turn into data, data turns into information, right? Simple. But if you think about how much information or data we're collecting, we get about 3.8 billion pixels of data in a minute. And what we do with that data then is work to try and create and turn that into information. And AI is a huge accelerant for us, being able to better and more cognitively kind of go look through that data. And we're being able to evolve, say, instead of just being able to search and be able to look over a wide area, but now once you find something, AI is helping us be able to put the pieces together to how do you track something, identify it as a threat, and maybe even help put a targeting solution on it. And all of that was not, the technology wasn't there until the last couple of years, and now we're accelerating it to really cool kind of capabilities.
Absolutely. I know there's been some recent reporting about how Raytheon demonstrated the first AI/ML-powered radar warning receiver system. It was designed for fourth-generation fighter jets. Can you expand a little bit on that and its implications?
Sure, Brandi. We call it CADS, or Cognitive Algorithm Deployment System. And it goes into our ALR-69 radar warning receivers that go onto F-16s. But it's a different example of how we're using AI. In this case, we're using it for learning. I'll say in the was case, or how we really kind of how things are done today, when a radar warning receiver listens, as the pilot's flying, it's out there, it's listening, collecting data from anything that emits, and it compares what it's receiving against a threat database. And that threat database is static. So the pilot only gets alerted if there's something in that threat database that shows up and says, hey, here we are. You know what this is, it's something you need to be concerned about, you ought to go look over here. But what we're doing with CADs is it's a module that just fits into and integrates into the existing system. We're working with DeepWave, which is a AI company, and they're allowing us to actually start listening and learning. So now the ALR 69 is able to take in those emissions, and it learns and it evolves as the pilot's flying to be able to understand, hey, maybe this new signal that's coming in is actually a threat that's not actually in the threat database based on some of the characteristics that the AI tool recognizes. And so then it can go and provide the pilot with a broader list of information of kind of a threat list that's prioritized and allows that pilot to make better information or make better choices. And all of this, I think, is really key in the defense environment. We live in this world of data, and I see AI as being an incredible tool for being able to take that data, turn it into actual information that a human or somebody can actually do work against, take action against.
Absolutely. And with that, the CAG system, as you think about how it's going to continue to evolve or develop, is it that, we're talking about smarter systems, advancing smarter systems, is it that it's continuing to learn from threat data and sort of other information that can grow in what you're inquiring, or where does it go from here?
Yeah, it learns from not only the data that's coming in, but what the pilots do with that data. And so, it might come in and prioritize a new type of signal, and it might not be as high a priority. And if it keeps showing up, but it's never selected as something of a point of interest, the system itself learns from that, and then ultimately says, okay, that is not a threat, and it would put it way lower on the prioritization list.
It's really interesting. I know that Raytheon has a strong legacy in supplying air and missile defense assets. Today, there's a lot of buzz in that realm as it pertains to the administration's new vision for the Golden Dome. What are some of the opportunities and challenges that high-dollar initiative presents, particularly from your perch at Raytheon?
Sure. Well, a Golden Dome's exciting. At the end of the day, it is a directive to put a layered defense against all kinds of potential threats against the United States: cruise missiles, drones, ballistic missiles, and whatnot. And so as Raytheon, as we look at the Golden Dome opportunity, we are providers of sensors and effectors that do just that, the missile defense kind of systems. You think about, as an example, the Qataris. Raytheon helped supply a number of different layered long-range, mid-range, short-range defensive systems in time for the World Cup. And that was one of the things that led to, I think, a successful and peaceful World Cup. Well, Golden Dome is perhaps a much broader, challenging situation because the United States is bigger, the threats have changed, and everything else. And so at the end of the day, I think we're all looking at how do you put together that layered defense system of sensors, as well as then the appropriate effectors to kind of maximize an impact. And kind of AI ties into this in that, again, going back to the data and the incredible amounts of data and coordination that's going to be required to be able to turn that into information in the event that there is a threat and something has to happen against it. And so we're excited about Golden Dome as an opportunity, and think that the systems that we have today are a wonderful starting point. I guess that would be the last thing I would say is, the administration's looking to put Golden Dome in place in the next couple of years. And that means you have to start with proven systems. And our recommendation going forward would be use the systems that are doing the work, heavy lifting today in Europe or in the Middle East, the Patriot systems and ASAM systems that are proven, and then continue to evolve and enhance them as you go forward. But yeah, Golden Dome's been a very interesting, exciting opportunity.
For sure. Ambitious, but sort of as you're suggesting, it's like get started and you'll see how it pans out.
That's right.
There's also been a lot of policy and acquisition shifts in and around the government, and a lot of momentum, I'd say, early into this administration. So what are one of the recent shifts involved cutting back all the operational test and evaluation inside DoD to accelerate the delivery of new tech and weapons to the military. That's how it's been pitched.
Yep.
I've been wondering, in some ways, whether that will result in more of the onus for T&E being on companies and contractors in the space. You sit from an interesting viewpoint with all that. So how are you thinking about that?
Well, I mean, I think it's a really neat opportunity. And I guess I would couch it maybe a little bit differently, but I guess complementary to what you're saying of we're all trying to get current and new technologies to the field faster. And for those who don't know, a typical DTOT operational test environment could take up to like 2 to 3 years to get through. And so the question is, how might you be able to shorten the development stroke by minimizing DTOT? And DT and OT is where you actually go out and actively put the equipment in its operating environment and you run it through the paces. And so I think that one of the keys to being able to do that is moving more towards a simulated environment. And in fact, the government has set up a joint simulation environment, which is a resource kind of co-owned through the Air Force and the Navy, which is looking at how do you do the really hard things in a more cost-effective, faster manner. Things like developing ConOps, testing systems at the corners of the envelope where there's maybe either cost or risk elements that prohibit you from going there. And as you continue to unravel that, I think there's opportunities to look at how do you use simulation, high fidelity models that have been validated and whatnot in order to certify software, certify hardware, or even get to the point where you're making operational test, development test decisions based on that simulated environment. It's pretty cool.
So does it, from your perspective, there is a big potential for it to accelerate sort of the delivery of those systems still in a responsible way?
Very much so, and I think responsible is a key point, right? That the government has a very strong, robust, rigid test protocol because of the need for quality and safety. And I think that one of the things that continues to be kind of a set of boundary conditions, I guess, for moving from a live, actual DTOT environment into sort of a simulated environment is ensuring the quality and safety of the products. And I don't think there's anybody in this room or anywhere that would say that that's not super important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Are there any other sort of policy or procurement modernization moves you'd like to see DoD or the administration pursue in the near term?
That's a loaded question, but I'll just start maybe with acquisition. Again, with the intent of being able to accelerate bringing capability, into the field, one of the first elements up front is the acquisition process. And there's a lot in the news today about perhaps things that can be done to streamline. But if I were to tie it back to artificial intelligence and kind of the way that I view our use within Raytheon of artificial intelligence is, in order to acquire something, we go through a pretty laborious process of receiving a proposal, writing responses, collecting data from all over to be able to support and justify those responses, and then ultimately you go through a negotiation process. But I can envision a world in which AI or artificial intelligence actually helps us sort through the 100 years of cost data that exists within the defense acquisition process, and can sort through that, and we can develop models that are co-owned between industry and the government that would allow for, say somebody wants to go buy 1,000 AMRAAM missiles. Well, you could go to that tool, that co-owned thing, you can type in the right parameters, or maybe just ask it the question, and it would go through and sort through all the data, all the compliance issues, all that, and come back with a range of options that then the government and industry could look at and say, you know what? That looks like the right number, let's move forward. And if you could do that in an afternoon or do that in a day, you might be able to take a year's worth of acquisition timeline out of the process. And so again, it's not necessarily a policy change, but I would assume policy would have to change in order to get there. But it really is looking at novel ways in which we can speed up the overall process to be able to bring new things to bear.
I sense this trend in all we talk about of applying technology to make things better, influence to make it better. Wanted to ask you one sort of broad question, but when you think about AI and the future that we're entering, what in your mind is the greatest opportunity that it presents to humans, and what's the greatest threat?
Well, I guess, Brandi, it kind of goes back to the structure of AI and what we are trying to do. And there's sort of a yin and a yang there. I didn't really highlight it kind of at the end of the 3 days of the conference, but I kind of break down AI into two simple things. You've got the data sets, and then you have the models or the neural networks that the data sets are that explore the data sets to come up with your solutions. And I'm sure that there's been a significant amount of conversation here this week about ethics, safety, and whatnot, and being able to put the right boundary conditions, the right guidelines, the right, I actually read in one AI company's models, their constitution of what entails good ethical decision making in AI, right? But those are the things that kind of put the, let's say, the appropriate guide rails around what you're trying to do. And we, however, in the defense industry, are trying to provide products that are more autonomous, more effective, more lethal. And so you can see there's a little bit potentially of a opportunities and threat that comes with that, right? AI is definitely going to help us become more autonomous. It is going to help our systems become more lethal. But at the same time, we need to be able to do that in an environment that is both ethical and safe. And I think so as we kind of look over the next 5 years or so, I think there's going to be a real tug of war. Again, the defense industry is, I think, really mature in ensuring safety, ensuring human in the loop, humans in that decision-making process in anything that happens. And I think there's going to be a little bit of a tug of war, a little bit of a tug and pull that says, if you believe that you can safely and ethically allow your new systems to make decisions that allow them to be more lethal, more autonomous, you're going to want to see that push forward. And so, again, it's maybe not a direct answer to your question, but I think that's going to be one of the interesting frontiers on the defense side of AI application is what is the role of the human in the loop? How do you kind of optimize that through the maturation of artificial intelligence in defense systems and balancing that against ensuring that you're doing things in a safe and ethical environment?
Absolutely. And I think it's super important that people who are sort of in your position making and building things for the government are thinking that front on. Does Raytheon or RTX, do you guys have like an AI governance or any sort of like help on that?
We absolutely do. In fact, I think Vince Campisi, our Chief Information Officer, was in here yesterday. He talked a little bit about this, but we're kind of, like I said, slow adapters. And I think it's because we are methodical adopters of artificial intelligence because we want to make sure we get it right. And so we have written our own set of governance. We continue to partner, looking for ways to partner with artificial intelligence companies in order to not only develop our defense systems, but also the infrastructure that drives the company. But we're doing that in a very measured, methodical way to ensure that, again, we're doing it with the right ethics in place, the right ethos, that we've got the right checks and balances that allow us to feel good about the decisions that we make should they be enabled by artificial intelligence. Yeah.
Well, we're almost out of time. Are there any closing thoughts or anything else you want to share?
Well, I guess, yeah, just leveraging that, I appreciate the question, and leveraging that piece, I think it's really important that we continue to encourage and support the entire infrastructure that makes up AI. And again, as a company that is not in the business of AI, but rather the business of using AI, I really want to stress the need for collaboration, the openness between the AI companies, I call it the data, and those are the folks that are creating the neural networks and whatnot, and the conscious, the boundary conditions, but then also working with the practitioners like Raytheon ourselves, who are creating the data models to make sure that we're developing all these things in the right direction. And then of course, in the defense arena, making sure we're doing it hand in hand and we're not outstepping the government, the Department of Defense, or any of their priorities, initiatives, policies, and whatnot. And it really does come from that triad, working very closely together to be able to evolve and make the right decisions to help preserve our way of life, protect our warfighters, and be able to get these new capabilities into the field appropriately.
Well, Bryan, thank you so much for joining me on stage for this great discussion. Thank you to our audience and to SCSP for hosting us. Have a good one.
Thanks, everybody.